joining us for the shir.
Welcome.
This gentleman.
The topic today I hope to cover is, we're calling it When Looks Can Kill, various halachos of Hezek Riya. So, a short introduction. We're familiar in general with the concept of Hezek, causing damage or trying to prevent causing damage from one to another. Masechtas Bava Kama is dedicated to discussing in the beginning the four main categories of damage and the myriad of details of tashlumin, the monetary compensation that there is to cover the damage that's incurred. In the second parak of Bava Basra, parak lo yachpar, the Gemara there discusses various halachos of harchakas nezikin, not physical combat, hand-to-hand damages, rather obligations neighbors have upon one another to be careful while doing certain activities within their own backyard, planting certain types of trees or other types of crops, so that it won't, go over to their neighbor. And those halachos are applicable as well. However, the Gemara there, in most cases, there is no chiyuv tashlum, and there's no monetary obligation for such damages. Nonetheless, the Gemara says it's usher. So that's just the basic idea in general of different types of damages that we should try to prevent from causing. There is no specific pasuk in the Torah which tells us that these type of halachos are preventing my things growing in my backyard from protruding into your backyard. Those halachos of harchakas and zikin. There's no specific pasuk in the Torah, and the Mefarshim discuss different possible Mikoros sources for this Isser. Some say it's learnt out from the general halacha, the mitzvah we have of Hashavas Haveda, right? I have a mitzvah to return a lost object to my fellow Jew. So that fundamentally that teaches us that we have to ensure that no one, we're making sure that no one loses their money. So all the more so, Kavachomer, that I have to make sure to prevent anything that I own, any of my backyard vegetation from growing into someone else's backyard. Or others suggest that the source for this type of hezek is learned from the general concept of gezela. Gezela is mentioned numerous times in the Torah, and typical gezela is the gana for the gazlans taking something out of the owner's rishus and preventing the owner from using it. So what's the difference if I take it out of his rishus and prevent him from using it, or I do something to damage his property or his possessions? The idea is the same, that I'm preventing the owner from having full usage of his item. So wherever the source is, whether it's from Hashavas Haveda or Gezela, it's not going to be the focus of our discussion today, just some general conceptual ideas of that's where it's based in a general sense in the Torah. Now we're going to discuss today a different source of hezek called hezek riya. Now this form of hezek, there is nothing physical to it at all. There's nothing protruding from my backyard, no trees growing, no vegetables going into anywhere else. There's nothing physical involved at all. However, there are numerous details. The Gemara from the first parak of Bava Basra and then the third parak of Bava Basra and parak Sabatim discuss this in numerous different details of exactly where and how we're allowed to place our windows facing our neighbors' backyards, or our neighbors' houses and the doors, and all the myriad of details of what the Gemara called hezek riya. We are not going to get involved today in those specific parameters of how and where we're allowed to place our windows and doors opposite our friends' houses. Rather, in general, we're going to discuss the idea of what is the problem, what were Chazal worried about when they introduced us this concept of hezek riya, and different halachos that we can learn from the different reasons why Chazal asked it. So we're going to start now with the Mishnah number 1 in the booklet, the Mishnah at the end of the third parak of Bava Basra, the end of parak Sabatim, where the Mishnah there discusses the case of a person cannot open a window or start a new window or open up his shades to look out into his friend's chutzner or a door opposite his friend's door. And this is a continuation of a bunch of Mishnayos there in Ches Sabatim, which the Gemara here doesn't use the term hezek riya, but previously the Gemara called it hezek riya. And the Gemara here, a couple lines in where it says the Gemara right away asks, so where can we base this in the Torah? Where is a source that we can see in the Torah that this is the problem? So the Gemara says, Minohani Mili, Amar Rab Yochanan, the Amar Kra, the pasuk in this upcoming week's parasha, Parshas Balak, says, Vayisa Bilam es Einov, Bilam lifted up his eyes, Vayares, he saw Shochem the Shvatav, and he saw the Jewish people encamped. Every person, the tribes were set up separately. So the Gemara asks, okay, so Ma'ra, so he saw everyone's houses, very nice, he had a bird's eye view, so to speak, of everyone. What was the big deal? So the Gemara says, Ra'a she'ein pischei ahaleim mechuvanim zeh lazeh. Bilam saw the tremendous milah that Klal Yisrael, they set up their tents in such a fashion that nobody's opening was facing exactly opposite their friends, so no one can see directly when they're coming out of their own tents. They shouldn't be able to see directly into their friend's tent. Amar, so Bilam said, "Ru'uyin halalu shetishra aleim shchina." For this alone, it's sufficient. That is a reason why the Shechina should rest upon Klal Yisrael. And as the Pesukim continue, as we know, Bilam goes on to say the famous pasuk of Matovo Alecha Yaakov Mishkanosecha Yisrael. So here we have the Gemara saying this is the source where we see in the Torah that Klal Yisrael is given the praise of being careful in this matter of making sure not to look in other people's properties, and that was enough of a reason that we should have the Shechina be Sheirah. So the first question I want to discuss, the Gemara doesn't bring a pasuk that says it's usher. The Gemara just brings a pasuk from Bilam that shows how it's a tremendous milah, tremendous good thing that Klal Yisrael is doing. So is this just proper etiquette? Is good behavior? We learn from here, and that's enough for us to for the Shechina to be masher upon us, or is there real damage that could be incurred? Is there something real hezek happening here that we have to be careful of? And that's what we can see from this pasuk. So the Ramban in Baba Basra on Daf Nun Tes, on the previous mission over there in Baba Basra, cut out just a couple of lines. It's a long piece in the Ramban, but the Ramban speaks out very clearly. He calls it Hezek Riyah is Niskei Adam Ba'Adamu. It's regular, full-fledged damages, one Jew to another. It falls into the regular category of damage, and the Ramban suggests there are three potential reasons of damage that could occur through Hezek Riyah. Number one, he says where it's underlined imishum ayin ra, which we'll get into each one in detail. Either it's going to be ayin hara, or he says imishum lishna bisha, or he says because it's a form of degrading speech, or as we commonly refer to as lashon hara. Or number three, he says mishum tzniusa, it's a lack of modesty when you're looking into someone else's house. So again, the Ramban's pointing out for us there are three problems in Hezek Riyah. And I'm going to change the order, drop of the Ramban just for organizational purposes, how we're going to work throughout this year. So number one, we're going to discuss Lashon Hara. Number two, we're going to discuss the inyan of Tznius. And number three, we'll discuss the inyan of Ayin Hara. The three issues that the Ramban delineates that are included in Hezek Riyah. So the first thing I want to discuss, like I said, is Lashon Hara. And the question that should jump out is that Hezek Riyah, like we said, is simply using our eyes, not our mouths, not our tongues. So why does the Ramban refer to it as Lashon Hara? Lishna Bisha, a degrading form of speech. There's nothing being discussed over here. It's purely, it could be silent. There's nothing happening with our mouths. So why does the Ramban refer to it as Lishna Bisha? So I found in the Chuvas, the Rashtra V'Chakarta, it's a contemporary Chuvas Sefer, it's from a dying Grossman in Eretz Yisrael. And he there has a Chuvah which is discussing really a different Isser. He's discussing the Isser of eavesdropping or listening on to other people's conversation. What Isurim are involved in such a behavior. So the Shayal, the questioner in this discussion, suggested that it's going to fall under the general category of a Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom, the Ma'or HaGoyla from the Rishonim, he put a Cherem on anybody who reads someone else's letters. And this person wants to suggest, the Shayal over here wants to suggest that eavesdropping, listening into someone else's conversation, should fall under the same banner of this cherem, this prohibition that Rabbeinu Gershom introduced of reading someone else's mail. The eavesdropping should fall under the same prohibition. So again, this dying Grossman in his Chuvas with the Rashtra V'Chakarta wanted to suggest that it falls under to this. Eavesdropping could fall under this category of the cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom, but he says it's really much more than that. And he speaks out there are at least three potential problems with eavesdropping. Number one, a person's in transgression of the mitzvah of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha, as Hill told us, Ma'adasani Allah l'chavrach lo isav. It's something which you don't want done to you, don't do to somebody else, and no one wants other people to eavesdrop in his conversation. So therefore, Yahavta l'reacha kamocha would teach us that we should not listen to other people's conversations, and that would be an Issa D'Oraisa. And then he says, number two, eavesdropping will fall under the prohibition, the lav of lo selech rochel ba'amecha, that a person cannot be a gossip monger, a talebearer amongst his people. You're not talking, you're just listening. So he brings from the Chuvas Halachos Ketanos, which is an early Achron Maram Chagiz, where he says, and it's bolded here, he says, Sheish Isser levakesh ulechapes mistorin shal chaver. There's a prohibition to seek out and to snoop around and find out the hidden information of one's friend. And he says, I have a great Ráya to this. The Ráya is the Ramban in Baba Basra, which you just quoted, that Hezek Riya has Lishna Bishna, has Lashon Hara involved to it. So he says, Mashma Isser Lashon Hara is even when someone, so to speak, speaking to themselves. That doesn't mean you have to actually enunciate it with your mouth, but he says rather someone who's Megala La'atzmai, Mistairav Shal Chaver, someone who lets be known to himself what his friend is trying to keep hidden from him. That is a form of Lashon Hara. Again, there's no speech going on, there's no give and take, there's no back and forth. So maybe there's, the Chafetz Chaim has a whole list of Lavin, Avad Lashon Hara, Maitzi Shemra. So it could be a person who's transgressing Lashon Hara in this form might not have the whole slew of all the lavin that might be involved in Lashon Hara, because there's no more than one person involved. Just you're being the snoop, you're being the peeping tom. But nonetheless, that already is a transgression of some aspect of Lashon Hara, because you are the same way. I can't hear someone else's private business from somebody else, so it's a foul suit. The same thing. I can't go ahead and stick my nose in someone else's backyard.
Doesn't that change, though, then what is the definition of Lashon Hara?
Okay.
It's not Lashon, it's...
Right, right. That's really the point we're bringing out, that Lashon Hara then is not limited to speech. Lashon Hara now, the essence of Lashon Hara is finding out other people's business. It doesn't make a difference if you tell me someone else's business or I went ahead and found it out myself. The essence of the prohibition is the same, and that I'm getting information that's not for me to know.
It's Kabbalah's Lashon Hara.
Okay, right.
And the Chafetz Chaim also says you could just wink or make a little nod with your head. That's also Lashon Hara.
Same, right, in a similar vein. Right, where you're giving that negative feeling, those negative vibes, that communication. So that can be just, that's what we're saying, that's the same idea, just over here with Hezek Riya.
But he says here it's more than, I think, even more than just being Makabel, because it's misapularized.
Right, so...
Words, it's still, he's redefining what is Lashon.
Okay, but I'm not sure if it means... It doesn't mean you really have to talk it out to yourself, right?
No, I understand.
But it's not just saying, it's more than just being Makabel. Okay.
Oh, you think it's like...
Okay, it could be it's more than being Makabel.
Yeah. He's both.
It comes out, according to the Ramban in this Tshuva, that the Isser of seeing your friend's business is the Raisa, the Seach Rachel Ba'amechu. Why don't the Gemara just say that?
Okay. Granted. I'm with you. I think from all the Makoros that we're going to see, whether it's Lashon Hara, Tznius, or Ayin Hara, we could all have psukim that could, we can blame it on, but maybe they're just a smachtas and not enough to, make it a real full-fledged Isser like that. That's I'm not sure. Okay, so that's issue number one, the first nidun of Lashon Hara. The Ramban telling us that there's a certain essence of Lashon Hara that applies here in Hezek Riya as well. The second nidun that we're going to discuss by Hezek Riya is the general concept of tznius, of modesty. And the Yad Ramah Rishon in Baba Basra really speaks to that a little bit in the second paragraph over here, number 4. He says, from here we see, he quotes the Gemara in the first paragraph, and he says, from here we see that there's an Isser because Mishum Tzniusa Dinashi. The women are going to feel uncomfortable if they know that they just can't do what they need to do in their regular household chores if everyone else is allowed to just see what's going on in their own backyard. Keep in mind that the Rishon Rashi tells us, and this comes up often throughout the Gemara, is that whenever we refer to a chutzner in the times of Chazal, it's not a typical backyard or front yard like we have today. I don't know, I wasn't there back in the days of the Gemara exactly how large their apartments or houses or tents were, but there definitely wasn't a lot of space. And Rashi says that in those days, roiv tashmishin b'chutzner, most of the household chores, most chores that had to be accomplished were done in the chutzner, not inside in the comfort of your own home, but they were done in some outside setting, the laundry, the washing the dishes, whatever needed to be done. The way things were set up in those times, roiv tashmishin would be in the chutzner. That's where typical household chores were taking place on a regular basis. So, and that was typically done by the women, and it's going to prevent them from doing what they need to do if they know that everyone's going to know, what's going on, whose turn it is to do laundry today, things like that, and that's going to prevent people from doing what they need to do, and that's going to be a form of hezek. Is it harmful to them per se? Not necessarily. There's harm happening according to this. It's just the fact that I'm not being able to carry out that which I need to do. And by you looking into my backyard, to my chutzner, or to my house, of course, it'll be the same thing. You're preventing me from doing what I'm allowed to do or what I need to do. And that's a form of hezek. And he speaks out, he says, it's interesting, he says, the Isal Kadaitach, the Yad Ramah writes, the Inyan Dina B'Chud Karmin, if you're just going to say it's a regular black and white halacha, that it's straight up usher, so he says, Mai Ru'uyin Halol Shetish Oleim Shechina. So why is that specifically special that the Shechina should reside on Klal Yisrael? Meaning, Maybe Bilam could look down on Klal Yisrael and see they're all wearing tzitzis, they're all wearing tefillin. They're all keeping Shabbos. Why is that not enough of a reason that Shechina should be shayra on them? The way I'm understanding the Yad Ramah is that because it's not just a black and white halacha, this is what you have to do, this is what you can't do. This is an extra zahirus that we're being careful in order to make sure, afford everyone the comfortability in their own backyard to do what they need to do, and if people shouldn't feel that they're being restricted from anything, and that itself is a maila to bring the Shechina. It's not just a regular lav that everyone, of course, is not going to do it. No one's going to go ahead. He saw that no one's murdering each other. Everywhere, all the other nations, there's murder happening every day. In St. Louis, at least one murder a day. Rahman al-Islam. So why didn't Bilam see that and say there's no murders happening in Klal Yisrael? Because that's Pasha, that's an Issa Lav in the Torah. It's well defined. So that's not necessarily enough of a reason why it should be Roy Shetishra Shechina Aleim, why the Shechina should be Shar on Klal Yisrael. This, now that we're defining it according to Yad Ramah, it's an extra level of tznius. It's going a little bit beyond the letter of the law. That's a reason why he's explaining why we could be zeichet to the Shechina. On the next page, I saw, now, you could argue and say that perhaps we should lessen the severity of Hezek Riyah nowadays in our backyard settings. Now, within the house, I think it's possible we can all agree that the Hezek Riyah would fully apply if someone would snoop around your living room windows, kitchen windows, bedroom windows. That we can all understand 100% that Hezek Riyah would apply fully. But based on what we said, like Rashi says, and the Rishonim speak out, that in those days, Roiv Tashmishim B'Chatzar, people did many of their chores in their Chatzar. So nowadays, a typical backyard, it's good for a barbecue, it's good for a relaxing day sitting out on a beach chair, but there's nothing really that we're doing that's necessarily private as much as it was in Mei Chazal. So perhaps you could argue and say that the halacha of Hezek Riyah shouldn't be so important. It's not necessarily, an obligation to have a fence between the neighbors. So I saw from Rabbi Yashiv, that's in number 5, he says that even nowadays, although it's true that chatzeres are different, but he says, "V'gam b'yameinu rabim nimnoim milasos devarim tznu." People will withhold themselves; they'll refrain from carrying out private matters. B'chatzar she'ena mugenes mehezek riyah. People are not comfortable. I want to have a barbecue Sunday afternoon in my backyard. And everyone typically sees me here in the cold. I'm wearing my hat, and jacket, and tie. I have a certain look. If I want to go to the backyard and have a barbecue wearing my t-shirt and jeans, I'm going to be embarrassed if I know the whole neighborhood's going to be able to see me. So even though nowadays maybe the Hezek Riyah doesn't apply in the same venue as it did, in the same exact way as it did with Mei Chazal, but the aspect of it and the essence of it still applies, says Rabbi Yashiv, and therefore we have to be as careful.
There's no havamina that there's any that there would be any tashlumin for this. Right?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't speak to that before. Yes, but the reason why there's no tashlumin for Hezek Riyah, even though the Gemara calls it a hezek, it's a damage. It's just simply because we can't pinpoint and say, it's a grumble, number one. Number two, we'll get to in a minute, we'll get to Ayin Hara and things like that. We can't say, I see a direct cause from what you did, therefore I have XYZ damages, and things like that, right? It's not as... We'll see more when we get to the third idea of Ayin Hara.
We're talking about restraining people from doing
right,
what
this
they want
right,
to
right.
do.
Sorry, let's
clarify that. If you were to say lock somebody in a room somewhere, you know what I mean, so he couldn't do what he needed to do, would you be chayav? Is that an Easter?
It's usher, but you might necessarily be obligated to tashlumin. Like we said before, and many of the halachos of our chakas nezikin in Perek Lo Yachbar, where you can't plant certain trees and certain crops if it's too close to the fence, your neighbor's property, because the roots could protrude, things like that. There are many cases where it's going to be usher, but we can't say $1 and cents amount to obligate you to pay because it's not clear exactly what happens, how the damage is caused. But nonetheless, the isser still exists.
It'll be sorry.
Okay, I don't want to get bogged down because there's a lot, like even this with how the windows allowed to be situated one to the other. There's a lot. All the Pais can quote a lashon of a tshuva of the Mari Tats. Mari Tats is the Talmud of the Beis Yosef, where he says that nowadays it's hakol lefi min kamadina. And I saw there's a tshuva from the Piskei Dinim of the Rabbanim and Yerushalayim from the Rabbanut. These cases that come up, in Yerushalayim it's very common with the way the buildings are situated. All the myriads of details there, how the marpesets are, if you can see your neighbor, not all these cases, and it really depends on how the building was originally built. And nowadays, it's very hard to say exactly. Someone could just wake up 10 years later after the building was built. I noticed the past 10 years my neighbor's looking on my porch. Now I want to obligate him to build a fence that he can't see into. I don't want to get about those. Are very technical halachic cases, and each case has to be dealt with separately, depending on what the minig of the Medina is, what the minig, not just the Medina in general, but the locale of what's considered normal, what's considered to be trespassing in regards to vision rights. But furthermore, at number 6, I want to speak. I think this is a very important point. Hezek Riyah doesn't only, when we're discussing Hezek Riyah Binyanei Tznius and giving people the right to feel comfortable in their own places, it doesn't only apply to a person in his own house or to a person in their own backyard. This is a tshuva, or actually just a short note written by Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein Shlita, a son-in-law of Rabbi Yashiv. And he writes that often what happens is a person unfortunately has some medical condition, an ambulance will come to a house and they have to get escorted away in an ambulance, whether it's on a stretcher or just being taken away by medical personnel, and they're embarrassed because the sirens go off, all the neighbors come out to the street, everyone wants to see what's happening, everyone crowds around the ambulance, everyone sticks their nose into everyone else's business, and the guy just doesn't want to get out of his house because everyone's going to ask, what happened? What's going on? What's happening? And he says that's just a form of Hezek Riyah because he says, we see so much Chazal, we're so concerned about the Yisuva Daitel Shal Chayla, keeping the Chayla at peace, in a proper mental state on Shabbos, without any Machala Shabbos in many cases, just to keep the Chola in a certain, comfortable mental state. All the more so, he says, if a person's going to feel embarrassed and not feel that he's comfortable going into the ambulance because he knows that all his neighbors and all the kids from the neighborhood are watching what's going on over here, that's a pashta form of Hezek Riyah. And he says, mitzvah hi legarish es kol ha-soyvim ha-mistaklim v'gamas yelim. It's a mitzvah to chase away and tell people, this is not the place for you to hang out. If you want to help, you want to bring something over, you can come help. But just to hang out and find out what's going on. I remember this, I had a story once where I was involved with somebody who was being taken into the ambulance, and it was somebody I was helping getting into the ambulance. I wasn't just being a nosy body. And one of my co-religionists came over to me as I was staying in a frum neighborhood, and he comes over to me and he says, "Oh, what's going on?" So I said, somebody's getting, needs to go to the hospital. Apparently, there's a stretcher. Someone's going. Who is it? What's going on? And I kind of, didn't want to fully answer the question because I didn't feel it was appropriate. This guy was not coming to help. He was just walking by, trying to be a little yentish, and the person who was on the stretcher is not interested in the whole neighborhood, where somebody from 5 blocks away, knowing that they were just taken away in the stretcher. If they need help, offer your help. If you're just coming to find out the latest hack in town, it's not always the most appropriate time, and it could even be often there'll be an Isser. He ends off interestingly. He wants to suggest that there's even an Isser if someone doesn't let to look at someone else's Tudat Zuhut, which is their identification card in Israel, or your driver's license, let's say in America, where you want to know how old that guy is. You always knew the guy in shul. You never knew if he's 45 or 65. You could never tell. So you finally got the opportunity to see his driver's license. You want to know. He says that's going to be also a form of Hezek Riyah. It's none of your business. It's an issue of tznius, and that will fall under the same category in the general umbrella of Hezek Riyah. Okay. So until now, we've discussed briefly the idea of Hezek Riyah. How included in it is Lashon Hara, and included in Hezek Riyah is also an inyan of tznius. Okay, now I'd like to discuss a topic, as many of us are familiar with, the term Ayin Hara. Now, Ayin Hara is a heavy topic. It's mentioned numerous times throughout Chazal in different fashions, and there are many perushim to explain Ayin Hara. We're going to discuss some of them today, but as we know, there are Shivim Panim in the Torah. There are numerous ways how to explain things, and we're not limiting it to say this is the way to understand Ayin Hara, and there are numerous ways how to explain it. But first, I want to start with a Shulchan Aruch Harav in number 7 in the booklet, where he quotes a Gemara in Bava Metzia, and he expounds upon it a little bit, and also in Bava Basra, where there's the prohibition. He says, "Asr lamoid al stei chaveroi." There's a prohibition to stand by your friend's field where crops are growing. Listakel ba b'shashhi oimedes bikumasa, to look through the field while the crops are growing, middle of the season. Excuse me, shlo yazikena b'ayin hara. So you should not cause damage to the field through ayin hara. Doesn't say what ayin hara is, but whatever it's going to be, X, whatever ayin hara is going to be, that prohibition is going to kick in if the crops are growing. And he says in parentheses, ve'en tzarich lomar, it's pashut, says the Shulchan Aruch Harav, she'asir listakel b'chaveroi b'inyan sheyesh locho sheyazikena b'ayin hara. Of course, you can't look at the guy's face or look at him. If you can't look at his field, you can't look at him also in a situation where there's going to be a concern that you're going to cause him damage with ayin hara. And he goes on, even if there's no real concern for ayin hara, a person has the right to say, I don't want you looking at my things, it's none of your business. Could be in the general category of tznius, like we said before. And then he continues to discuss that, let's say you have two people that are poor, that can't afford to build a wall in between their property, and they want to have a wall so that they shouldn't see each other's, what they're doing. He says you can even get money from the kupa of the ear, the tzedakah of the local charity should help. So if there's enough money in the fund, it is such a necessity to have a wall between good fences, make good neighbors, as we know, and this is such a necessity to pass in Shulchan Aruch Harav that we can even require the local vad to pay for that expense if it's possible. Okay, so we see the halacha. It's being paskin based on the Gemara, based on Chazal, that ayin hara is a severe isser that will obligate us not to look at our friend's property or our friend's crops while they're growing, or even at him if he feels that you're going to damage him. Now, what's going on over here? What's this ayin hara business? So in this week's parsha, in the beginning of the parsha, we know that they came down to Bilam and they tried to convince him to come curse Klal Yisrael. And Bilam first refuses, and he goes to sleep. He has this nevuah, the whole back and forth again. The parsha. Finally, he decides he's going to go. He gets on his donkey. The whole story with the donkey. Okay. Finally, Bilam reaches Balak, and Balak is upset at Bilam. What took you so long? I offered you everything. Okay. Bilam says, it's not really up to me. It's up to Hashem. Okay, they get by that. And the next day, the pasuk says at the end of Parachav Beis, I didn't bring the booklet, but the pasuk there writes, "Vayihi ba'boker." Was the next morning? Vayikach Balak es Bilam, and Balak takes Bilam. Vayaleu b'mais Baal, and they go up to this mountain, and they make these mizbechos, and they offer their karbanos to the avodah zarah. Vayar misham kitzei ha'am, and Bilam is able to see from that vantage point on top of the mountain, part of the nation. So Rabbeinu Bachya writes as follows: when the pasuk says Vayar misham kitzei ha'am, that Bilam was only able to see a part of the nation, he writes V'lo kulam. From this particular point on top, Bilam was not able to see all of Klal Yisrael. They were camped over in all four directions, north, south, east, and west. They were spread out, the whole encampment. There was a large area of 12 mil by 12 mil. Balak kept taking him to different areas to see Klal Yisrael from different angles. What was the point of that, says the Rabbeinu Bachya? Lahalos has built the Makom Kavod, to bring up to a high point. Sheyira ha'am yisham, he should be able to see the nation from there. And he says, V'yiskavein aleihem l'koach ha'habata, that he should look at them with intent, with a koach ha'habata of staring at them. Sheyabid bahem, and stare at them for a prolonged period of time. Doesn't say exactly how long. Kizeh mikochos hanefesh, this is something which is classified as a kochot, the power of the soul. The Gemara has often many stories where the Gemara says that I'm sure by Achai or others were dalig gavinoi debeina lemechazeh. He said, lift up my eyelids so I can see who is in front of me. Different stories in the Gemara there where a certain Tana felt that someone was acting inappropriately, and he said, lift up my, or I think it was Rabbi Yochanan Zaka actually also, he said, lift up my eyelids and let me see that person who's causing me that distress. He lifted up his eyelids. He looked at the person perished instantaneously. He fell into a pile of bones. That's the end of Lashon Rabbeinu Bachya. So Rabbeinu Bachya is telling us here that there's this concept in a spiritual sense of ayin hara, that Balak was trying to get Bilam to put these powers against Klal Yisrael, to look at them from different angles, so that the whole camp of Klal Yisrael will be influenced by this koach habata of the stare, so to speak, of Bilam. And he brings a source to this from the similar vein that we see in the Gemara, that some of the Tanoim had this ability. They were able to look at people that were causing them distress, and they fell into a heap of bones. Now, those Gemaras, there are numerous pshatim in those Gemaras itself, how that koach worked. So, but at least we're going the way Rabbeinu Bachya learns those Gemaras. It was a simple koach of a stare that was enough to turn that person into a heap of bones. Rav Brent showed me from this sefer called Sefer Bris HaShalom. I was not familiar with the sefer beforehand. It's a fascinating sefer written in the late 1700s, early 1800s by a Makubal, and he discusses various Talmud of Chaim Volozhiner. Okay, he had various chapters discussing the Bria in general from a Kabbalistic way and from other sources that he brings. And I'm not going to read through this whole piece. I think it's fascinating for those who want to read it. And he tries to find the chorus of what he's saying in the Torah. But his basic idea is similar to what we're saying here from the Rabbeinu Bachya. There's a certain koyach through our eyes, whether we can prove it scientifically or not. That's not what he's discussing. It's not for a laboratory. He's saying it's a koyach that Chazal understood, that certain people have this ability to influence a certain koyach of Ra in the Bria in a physical sense. It's not something tangible. You can't see it. It's not something we can, point to it and say this is like Alyssa was pointing out before. It was one of the reasons why we can't be mechayev someone to pay damages for it, to pay tashlum, because it's not something tangible. You didn't see the guy punch you out. So, okay, but there's something that exists in the Bria. Oh, okay, so here it's discussing koyach for bad. We'll get to good perhaps in a minute.
Was it considered a shvach to be able to distinguish the bad the person who had the koyach to be able to have the chavata?
Meaning to like shield yourself from it?
No, for the person who had the chavata, like in Zman of Nine or something, was it considered a shvach for them to be able to utilize it?
Meaning the fact that they had such a power to...
Yeah, and that they utilized it to be able to distinguish the raw and the
I would think so. I mean, the Gemara is pointing it out. We're just discussing the Tanaim that we're familiar with, who teach us all of Torah Shabbat Peh, and telling us that someone causing distress is something they felt had to be done to carry out against them. I'm not. I think says
that everybody has the power.
Right. That kind of everyone to a certain level, but they were able to carry it forward. I mean, okay.
The way I was taught this is that if you engender bad feelings...
Okay, well that's it. That's a different mahalach. That's a different mahalach. We're not discussing that mahalach yet. Hold on. That's more typical mahalach. This is the atypical mahalach. There's a sefer called the Sefer Tosefes Bracha, which is number 9. It's written by the author of the Torah Tamima ala Torah. He also wrote a sefer. This came out after the Torah Tamima called Tosefes Bracha. Additional ideas he has ala Torah. I thanked Young Israel Eitzer for having this in stock. I didn't have it, and they had it, so I was able to copy it from there. He brings down a fascinating story. He's quoting it. He has this. I only quoted part of the piece. He's discussing in general this idea of ayin hara, the way we're explaining it, that there's actual something of a mitzias, whether we can see it or not, in a tangible sense of a Chazal understood of a koyach of hezek. And he brings down a fascinating article that he copies from a Russian paper from 1881. I'm not familiar. I couldn't find out any more information about this newspaper. I don't know the authenticity of the writers, but the Torah Tamima, the Tosefes Bracha, felt it was enough of a good story to quote it, and I think it is quite a fascinating story. He brings down that the Russian government had sentenced somebody for whatever reason to the death sentence, and he was sitting in death row. He was waiting his term to be executed, and the scientists wanted to do an experiment on him before they put him to death. So what did they do? A little bit of a mean experiment. They put him in a room and chained in such a fashion that, well, first they starved him for 3 days. He had no food for 3 days, so obviously he was very ravished, on the brink of death already, just because of his lack of food. And then they shackled him in such a way where he was able to see a loaf of bread, but not be able to reach it. And all he was able to do after fasting for 3 days was sit for hours, doesn't say how long this happened for, and just sit and stare at that loaf of bread. And just stare. Obviously, he was famished, and he was on the throngs of death just from the fact that he was starved for 3 days. And he writes, this is what he quotes from this article from this Russian paper, they cut open this loaf of bread after the person perished from this death, this really miserable death sentence. And they cut open the loaf of bread, and he writes, Kimola re'elim va'arosim chazakim. It was full of, I guess, poisons or mold or something yucky that had grown inside the bread. And he brings that from this article they wanted to prove in 1881 in the Russian paper that this is a mitzias that exists. They had no way of proving it from a scientific way. They didn't see anything emit from his eyes. As we know, there's no beams coming out of his eyes, no laser beams, nothing like that. But he says the same way there's a certain koyach of hypnotism and other things he wants to suggest perhaps work in a similar way. I don't want to get involved in all the details because I don't want to get lost in the scientific aspect of it. He just wants to bring this as another idea that you see even in modern times, that such a concept could exist l'ra. What someone was asking before, I think Rav Yassel was asking before, could it exist l'tova also? So he quotes Rav Yaakov Emden in his Sefer. And this is fascinating. I looked it up. The way he quotes it is a little different in the Siddur. I looked up in the Siddur itself, and Rav Yaakov Emden writes as follows. he writes, I quote it the way Rav Emden actually writes it. He writes that Shamati, that he heard that there are Jews in the country. I don't know what it is in English. He says the country of Tugramot, Taf Vav Gimel Reish Mem Hey. I don't know, maybe it's somewhere in Europe or in Africa, I'm not sure where this is, but the Jews that live there, he writes, their minig is that they hang in the shul the beya, the egg of a bas yana.
You can see it in Brooklyn or some shit.
Yeah? They have a bas yana. Now, bas yana, it's a machlekes, the Rabbi Kaplan Chumash brings down, the common translation is an ostrich, but I think, from the way I understand it, it probably means an owl. Because, as we know, the owl has very piercing eyes, and the bas yana, he writes, the way it incubates its egg is by staring at it for prolonged periods of time. The typical way a chicken or any bird will incubate its egg, will sit in it, and the body warmth, as you have incubators, will keep the egg warm. He writes, Rav Emden writes that the bas yana, whatever that is, whether it's the ostrich or it's the owl, I think the way he's explaining it might be the owl, but okay, I don't have a riot to that per se. But he writes that is the way it's. He says, "Ki bas hayana mechamemes beitzasa biriyasa." It warms its egg with its vision. Umaytzia b'derech zeh afreicha, and that's the way it brings out its chicks. Mikan nira, Rav Emden writes, "Machush haraus poyel," how strong the idea of vision is. Im otzem ha'abata, the Sagach just looking at something, and he writes, "V'zeh inyan novel l'tzilas," a beautiful idea for davening that we should have kavana and stay focused, looking at our siddur and looking at Devarim Shebekadusha, and not get wandering during davening. So these countries, wherever exactly they were, they had this custom of hanging these eggs in the shul to remind ourselves of this concept of what just staying focused on something could accomplish. Okay, so the first idea, just want to bring forth of Ayin Hara, that's the atypical pshat I would like to say, is that there's an aspect of Ayin Hara which is a physical manifestation of just looking at something and it's causing damage. I'll share with you a personal story I had a couple of years ago. My wife and myself, we went to speak to a Matzio Salman Shlita, and we had a couple of things we were discussing with him, and my wife brought up with him certain questions about Ayin Hara. And this is what Matzio Salman said. I didn't ask him on it, but I would like to suggest this is what he meant. What he said is, he responded to my wife, is that I don't know if there's someone in this situation, he was explaining, there's someone nowadays who has the koyach to harm with Ayin Hara. Now, what did he mean? I didn't ask him. So it gives me open license for interpretation what he meant, perhaps. If he understands Ayin Hara like this, then I can understand what he meant. If it's going to understand Ayin Hara in the next idea of how we'll explain Ayin Hara in a more typical fashion of other Mefarshim explain Ayin Hara, then I would like to argue that it is Ayin Hara Shayach nowadays in many cases. But if you understand Ayin Hara as a certain koyach that is actually emitted through the eye, literally, then it could be that nowadays we have lost, with for whatever reason, that koyach doesn't necessarily exist in the way it used to exist b'mei Chazal or even in the times of the Rishonim. And therefore you can argue and say we don't have to worry about it so much nowadays. Before we get to the other idea in Ayin Hara, I just wanted to share a fascinating Ma'or V'Shemesh from the great Hasidic works in number 10, where he brings a Zoya, where it's underlined, where again the Pasuk says that the original Pasuk we started with, that Bilam was looking out to Klal Yisrael and saw that their tents were not opposite one another. The Pasuk said, the ends off the Pasuk is Vatihi alav ruach Elokim. And then literally the Pasuk, if you look in the article regular translation, the Pasuk means that the Spirit of Hashem rested upon Bilam. But he brings from the Zohar HaKadosh, the Zohar HaKadosh says that Pirush B'Zohar HaKadosh, Allah, Atihi Allah Ruach Halakim, Allah here refers to Klal Yisrael as a unit. Al Yisrael Shar Sashchina. That Klal Yisrael was able to be Shar the Shechina. Not that Bilam got the Hashras HaShechina, but rather Klal Yisrael got the Hashras HaShechina. Why? Shlo Yuchol L'Kalam. It was a preventative measure for them that they should have the shield that the Shechina is now going to prevent Klal Yisrael from being afflicted of the harm of the Ayin Hara of Bilam. And he says, V'niyah B'derech Pasha, we can explain very simply, Shumida Keneged Mida. It's a tit for a tat here. Lefi shehem shamru es atzmam, since Klal Yisrael, as we see from this pasuk, was being extra careful. The vilti l'staka kolechad pischa shechaveirei, not to look into other people's properties. Lirois ba'asakav kadesh le'kantu by Ayin Hara. We were being careful not to afflict pain on others with Ayin Hara. The zos mida keneged mida, Kadosh Baruch Hu berov rachamav protected us at this point when Bilam was trying to gaze upon us and put in that koyach hara upon us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shechina, so to speak, kicked in and deflected that and protected us mida keneged mida, because we were being careful not to harm one another with Ayin Hara. which leads me to a fascinating discussion, which I wanted to share one Maramakim in general. What does it mean, the Shechina? We always use this terminology, Shechina. The Shechina is hovering over us, and now we're in Golos, the Shechina is Begalusa. So there's many different Pirushim about this, but the Noda B'Yehuda and Shuvas, I have to always take a halachic twist on it, you know. So Noda B'Yehuda and Shuvas defines what Shechina is. He brings a Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim that explains a simple. Anytime we find the word Shechina or Shochein in the root, the shoresh of the word in the Torah, it means to dwell with a hasmada, with a for a prolonged period of time, in a specific place. Vayishkon ba'olei mamre. In other many psukim we see shochein means dwelling, means resting. It's being focused and centralized in one specific area for a period of time. So he writes, the word Shechina is the same idea. When we're talking about Hashem being shochein on Klal Yisrael, that Kadosh Baruch Hu is shining specific attention on Klal Yisrael at a specific time, which we're zocheh to when we're in good shape, when Beis HaMikdash is here, and as Hashem Mashiach, we'll have the Shechina back at a regular time, and that's going to be a protective force at all times, because, so to speak, we have that hovering cloud of Hashem protecting us. Now that the Shechina is begalos, right, so that the Shechina, so to speak, scattered throughout the world, and we can only pick up certain fragments of light. There are certain things we can do that maybe will get us more Hashras HaShechina even in Galos, and that's just an extra protection. But the idea in general of the Shechina protecting, he writes, just that word Shechina is not a kadosh word, it's not a name of Hashem, it's just the idea of the hovering, of the centrality of Hashem watching over Klal Yisrael in a specific way. Okay, that's an interesting point. The last idea of Ayin Hara, which is really what our listeners bring up before, and it's really also a sheer unto itself, but just the idea that Ayin Hara is not necessarily something that, like we were saying before, of a supernatural force, so to speak, of a certain koach of hezek that's emitting from the eyes just by looking at something. Rather, the idea of Ayin Hara, I just quote this from the Panim Yafos, which is the Hafla al Torah. Really, it's discussed. Rav Dessler discusses it at great length, and Rav Sisei Chaim Friedlander also discusses at great length. Just very bekitzer, the idea is that the idea of Ayin Hara, according to them, is making sure that we're not showing ourselves off in such a way where we're arousing other people's jealousy against us by showing off what we have, by keeping our Lamborghinis parked in our driveway so that everyone who walks by could whistle at it and say, "Wow, that's pretty impressive," or anything of that nature, which is arousing other people's kinna. That's being ma'or a kitroig, a certain prosecution against us in Shemayim. And the Ayin Hara is that since we're arousing other people to have the prohibition of kinna, now, of course, you can argue and say, what do you mean? It's that guy's fault. He's being jealous. Well, he should work on his midos and not be jealous. But at the same time, if we're tripping him up, we're causing and doing things that are causing him to have kinna, taiva, and all those problems which the Mishnah says are motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam. That is another idea of Ayin Hara, and that's being ma'ora kitrug of HaKadosh Baruch Hu against the person, that since you are arousing other people's jealousy, so you're causing other people to sin, and that's the reason why that person might suffer from certain ailments or certain problems because of that kinna that he's aroused. I'll just finish up. So, just to recap quickly, what we spoke out basically is that we learn out from Bilam, the Gemara and Baba Kama and Baba Basra Daf Samach is darshaning the prohibition of Hezek Riyah. Learn out from Bilam. Hezek Riyah, as the Ramban sums it up, there are three main issues of Hezek Riyah. Number one, we spoke out the idea of the Lashon Hara, finding out other people's business, same way as the prohibition of discussing it. The prohibition is also for a person himself to go ahead and snoop around to find out about it. Number two, the Indian in general of tznius, of preventing people from carrying out their private, or even if it's not the most private idea, private things in the comfort of their own homes or their own backyards, and that still exists nowadays, and that doesn't only apply to homes, it applies to anything, a person, like I said, getting into an ambulance or any other personal possession a person has. And number three, we discussed the idea of Ayin Hara and Hezek Riyah and different ideas of how Ayin Hara could be explained, whether it's a physical manifestation of a certain koyach that there could be emitted through a vision of looking at something that can cause damage to somebody else, or whether it's a certain kitcher that you're being ma'ir in Shemayim through the fact that you're arousing a certain kinna amongst people. And I just wanted to end off, we say every day in davening, we daven right before Kriya Shema, V'har eineinu b'sarasecha, that Hashem should enlighten our eyes in Torah, that there's a specific maila, that our eyes should be able to receive the light of Torah. Now, the Sfarim bring down that idea can only be if a person is being careful with his eyes. Now, of course, As someone came over to me and said, I'm sure you can discuss the prohibition that's always rampant in the summer of all the process, all the process that goes on in the street, and that's pasha that a person has to shield himself from that. But even this idea of shielding ourselves and being careful from looking over to our neighbor's property or any other person's private matters of any time, those are the ideas of keeping our eyes tahar, so we're able properly to be able to receive the Torah and Yani Kedusha properly, and with that, we should be zeichet to be marbek kvod Shemayim and be zeichet to be mak the Shechina and the Mashiach Tzidkeinu Meher B'Yameinu.